Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. In this bonus season, we are reading perspectives from some of Matt Cawthon's friends. Welcome to what we've been calling Season 2.5, Episode 7, where we're finishing Banner General Furyk Karede's point of view. I'm your co-host, Lajar Dane of the White Aja.
Hi, and I'm Giskel Cimarus, a scholar from Ilion. For any new listeners to our series, I want to remind you that The Wheel of Mind is an in-depth character reread podcast, and we may drop spoilers at random times, so this is your only spoiler warning. Today, we are examining Knife of Dreams, chapters 34 and 36.
And I'll get us started with my summary of Chapter 34, called A Cup of Kaf. When we last left Furyk Karede, he had joined with some other Deathwatch guards, some Ogier gardeners, and a Dersul Dam who had some Damane with her. Of course, his faithful servant Ajimbora is also still along for the ride. Karede and his entourage are now in a Shanchen camp to get some information, a task that's being complicated by all the insults that they're receiving. The rumor mill says that the Deathwatch guards have a fake High Lady Tuon that they're using to extort the locals for wealth. Karede himself has the restraint to resist responding to the slights to his honor, like sentries spitting on the ground before him and such. Ajimbora, however, has not been so reserved, we'll say, to put it delicately. He and everyone else had better cool it, though, because the High Lady is Karede's goal and his entire world, and so they need to get more information about where she is. He is just as personally insulted as Musange and everybody else, Musange who wants to kill a few men to cut down on said insults, but Karede recognizes that no insult is worth the High Lady Tuon's life. After all, he had accepted sword thrusts for duty. He could accept insults for it. Karede steps into the command tent that looks like a diversity-focused recruitment poster showing that ethnic representation in the Empire's war machine is apparently important to them. The commanding officer, Game Lounge, as his name auto-corrected to, Gamel Loun, orders everyone else out and offers Karede some coffee from his dwindling supply. Even though they are both Banner Generals, Karede's position in the Deathwatch Guard gives him the authority to seize and use any of Loun's resources, as long as he fills out the proper paperwork about it later. Karede's not a big paperwork guy, so he decides to avoid that hassle entirely and just deal pretty straight with the guy. This explains why, although Loun appears to have disdain for Karede just as the sentries outside did, he follows all the proper protocols befitting their respective ranks and shows him appropriate respect. Refusing to offer Karede coffee, after all, would have been an insult worth killing over, apparently. An interesting aside, and another mark of their near equality, Banner General Loun also has a servant similar in devotion, if not phenotype, to Ajimbora named Mantual. As Karede savors the coffee, regretting that his own inferior stock of beans had run out some time ago, Loun reluctantly updates Karede, as he must yield to the guard's slightly higher rank. Loun is baffled by the spread of the enemy, assuming they must be equipped with those Aes Sedai and Ashaman and be traveling. There's just no other explanation for how they're spread out over 300 miles and conducting so many raids and ambushes so quickly. They haven't had any victories to even capture any prisoners either, so they don't have any good information. This enemy is capable of taking out handfuls of entire banners with what must be something like 30,000 crossbowmen. Reportedly, the enemy has lost some of their number, but they don't leave behind any of their own dead for long enough for that to be confirmed. Their supernatural victories have soldiers whispering about fighting spirits. The Empire's forces have been outmaneuvered at every turn. Loun is relieved not to be in charge of locating and pinning this elusive enemy, but is happy to wait for Chizen to arrive with veterans from back home to finally clear out this local resistance. Privately, Karede deduces that the Aes Sedai with the High Lady Tuon probably do not have traveling. He's pretty sure that the only ones this group has are the ones from the Terrasen Palace, who reportedly did not have that ability. He also concludes that this Tom Marilyn that Seeker Moore had told him about might just be one of this land's great generals, if what Loun says is true about the enemy outmaneuvering them so soundly. Karede shares nothing of his conclusions, though, especially about his belief that the enemy has the true High Lady Tuon instead of the so-called imposter, which might unnecessarily endanger her further. He prepares to beat Chizen to the Malvide Narrows and is determined to retrieve the High Lady Tuon, even if he has to get her from Tarvalon itself. And thus ends Chapter 34, A Cup of Kaf.
I enjoy seeing through Karede's eyes, but there's a clarity here, even though he has so many of the facts wrong.
Mm-hmm.
If you stand back from a fresh perspective, look at all the facts that he has access to, he paints a very complete picture of what could have been going on. And again, that's with Xian Chan presupposition toward intrigue and saving face, things which don't appeal to most people on this side of the Aerith Ocean, except perhaps some Kyrian. But still, I love seeing the portrait that he paints through his eyes or in his mind. Now, some things that I think I didn't catch really the first time through is why the regular soldiers or the common soldiers felt like they could insult the Death Watch guards over this imposter daughter of the Nine Moons. Now, of course, that's a rumor that's going around. That's a rumor that's been spread trying to use the entire army to catch and kill the real daughter of the Nine Moons. But it just seems to me that this shows a very serious breakdown of the Xiantian discipline, because though they're looking down on the Death Watch Guard as being dishonorable and people who would use this false person to gain monetary wealth or whatever, you've still got to remember these are the Death Watch guards. They pretty much have a license to kill whomever they wish. I mean, they can be held accountable for it, but only well after the fact.
Right.
And they're very, very good at killing. That's something they've been trained to do many different ways, and they're very effective and efficient at it. So it seems to me that they have this serious breakdown of discipline and thought process, that you would spit in front of someone like that, to show your disrespect. Someone who could probably kill you before you could get your sword out of its scabbard.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is not a good sign for the Xiantian. And it surprised me that Kareed's thoughts did not go there, or at least we weren't privy to that if they did.
Yeah, same. I think it goes to show just how chaotic and loosely coordinated these forces now become when you're on this side of the ocean. When they're on the Shanchen continent, and there you have the full power of the Crystal Throne that could really enforce compliance with the proper discipline and everything. People really toe the line, but now that I think people are starting to understand that they're less supervised than they used to be. There are fewer listeners and seekers about, and could they even do anything anyway? I guess Surath et al. Are doing a really good job of sowing dissension, but I think it was just easy to do anyway, since they're so far away from their home base and not able to transfer information quickly enough across the whole ocean. Like, yeah, you can communicate with each other with the rocket and everything pretty well while you're in the Westlands, but they're still not crossing there at the ocean or anything. Yeah, it just goes to show that that sort of peace that it looks like the Empire has within itself, or that it kind of brings with it for the common people or whatever, is extremely fragile, and their system of honor and discipline and everybody knowing their place starts to break down pretty quickly.
Yes, yeah, well said. And it's broken down to the point that Kareed's servant Ajumbura has already killed some people, because of their disrespect to Kareed. So he's taken to leaving him at the camp. We're not bringing him inside the next military post, because it's harder to get information out of people when you've killed their friends, their assistants, their associates, their under generals. They tend to be closed mouthed at that point. So
and Kareed is saying, basically, we could go in and do this the harder way. Like, we could go in and get this information by force. I could seize everything with my rank. I'm the highest ranked person here, but let's not. Like, there's a smoother way to do this. Let's put our priorities in order, everybody. And it kind of sounds like, even if they weren't on this side of the ocean, that it would be acceptable for the Death Watch guards to kill for personal insults, because that's almost like an insult to the Empress. Like, Musange, at least in Kareed's eyes, thinks about it that way. An insult to the Death Watch guards as deep a cut as an insult to the Empress. And that goes back to what I said last week about how I think that these Dakovale of the Crystal Throne are almost like a part of the body of the Empress herself, that this is just another piece that kind of reinforces that to me. But Kareed,
I agree.
So it seems like that even though they want to just kill for these insults, for people like spitting on the ground and stuff, it seems like that's a fairly typical way for Shan soldiers to act. Unfortunately, like that would be acceptable to kill for your own personal honor and sort of, I guess, by extension, the honor of the Empress like that. But Karede is like, let's look at the bigger picture, and we've seen before that Karede has more regard for his duty than his personal honor. He is insulted. He's like, I'm just as insulted as all the rest of you, but we've got a bigger goal here. And if let's just do this as frictionlessly as possible so we can actually get a hold of the High Lady, right? This is the only way we can get to her. It just shows that Karede stands out. I mean, we've seen his competence amidst Westlanders and even compared to Seeker Moore, but now we're seeing it amidst other Death Watch guards. He's even excellent among the Death Watch guards, which is huge. So despite the fact that he must have had similar training to them and similar discipline and everything, he follows through on what he believes to be his duty to an even greater degree than the rest of them. So it just speaks to his character being extremely much more bound to Tuon personally. I think we know from the way he kind of feels for her in a paternal kind of way, I think, more so than just like doing his job like everybody else is doing.
Right. I like the details that he notices, and we've discussed this before. He being a bodyguard, he notices details around him. He doesn't look at what he expects to see.
Yeah.
He looks at what is actually there or what is not there. And one thing that's missing from this camp are any of the Rockin or toe rockin. They have a landing field there. They have a message pole up. So evidently there's some few amount, but it briefly goes through his mind that most of them have been recalled. So they're called in. Now we know what that's for. That is the Seanchan preparing their assault upon the White Tower. So I found that just that little tidbit of information. Oh, there's no rocking or toe rocking, and I haven't seen any around in a while at any of the camps.
Yeah, and it's something he thinks about, and he's like, well, that's not really my business. I'm here for the High Lady, and that's pretty much it.
Exactly. So he notices, and it passes through his mind, but it's just a bit of trivia for him. For us, the reader, it's very ominous because we know what's about to happen, and it's so heartbreaking, and we don't want that to happen, but it is an important part of the story. So, and I had thought on my reread that the attack on the White Tower came about earlier in the story than it did. But when I started flipping through this book, I'm like, oh no, here's Egwene still in the tower. You have the chapter attending Elida and things where she's having to be there to basically act as a servant at one of Elida's dinner parties. And so, the attack on the White Tower has not happened yet. I don't know why I kept wanting to put it earlier in the story.
Maybe just because Egwene dreamed about it so early. So once you're on a reread, you're like, oh, I know what that means now.
Yes. Oh, there's so many things you see like that are foreshadowing of huge momentous events.
Yeah.
But yeah, just one of the tiny little things you note going through this chapter. The next thing that really stood out to me is how Karede keeps his thoughts to himself when this other banner general is going on about the number of troops. Those 30,000 troops are spread out over, or had to be at least 30,000 crossbowmen, and they're spread out over hundreds of miles. They've got to have these gates and traveling. There's no other explanation for how they could travel this fast and this far. But in Karede's mind, he deduces, first of all, no, they do not have traveling, because if they did, they would have gotten the High Lady all the way to the White Tower immediately. They wouldn't have gone through this charade and everything else. So, but he can't let that information out. So he has a bigger picture in his mind of what's going on, and this banner general he's talking to has a smaller piece of the puzzle. So everything looks very different to him.
That's true. I think, too, that, what is that Upton Sinclair quote that's like, you can't convince a man of something when his getting paid depends on him not knowing that thing? I've totally paraphrased it, but I think I see Lowndes' situation as similar to this, where even if he had the same information as Karede, I feel like he would still be quick to chalk it up to, well, they've got magic. That's why we can't defeat these folks. Because that way he's a little less culpable, right? If he just keeps going, well, we just suck and they're outmaneuvering us strategy-wise, and that's kind of it. Like they just have good guerrilla warfare tactics. That makes him look really bad. So I
Right.
think he is very happy, Loun is, to throw up his hands and go, it's because they have traveling, and this is also not my business anymore. I just have to sit here until Chesn gets here to
Yes.
fix this
Right.
because he is at a total loss, I think.
Exactly. This is above my pay grade.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly where they are right there, and the exact tack he's taking. And Kareed can't afford to think that way. He can't afford to
Right.
compartmentalize. Now, on some details, he can where it truly cannot affect him, like the missing rockin' and things
Yeah.
like that. Okay, yeah, a bit of information, we file it away and we keep moving because I can't use it right now. But
Mm-hmm.
anything he can use right now, and this makes me think of when Matt first started forming the band. He
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to, but these people just kept following him after the fires of heaven and after the all the success he had in leading some of the groups of men there in Kyrian against the Shido. And and he would basically force them to march at a faster speed and cover more ground. He would make it a friendly competition. Oh, we did this many miles today. Can we do this many the next day? Because he talked about how mobility and speed is a soldier's life, and so they have done that for so long that here, even against other uh, very competent soldiers, very deadly forces, where they're outnumbered by these deadly forces. They're able to outmaneuver them both in the guerrilla warfare tactics and just sheer traveling speed.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so the Seanchi understand. Well, no army that size can travel this fast. Well, but they cannot picture in their minds it's a smaller army. It's traveling faster than you expect, and they've just got some tactical advantages that you weren't prepared for.
Yeah.
So they cannot picture that set of facts. But to me, it goes back to Matt trying to get his men to march faster and with greater speed because he knew that would keep them alive. He knew that would you keep them going and set them apart from every other army out there. So the band of the Red Hand has really shown themselves to be effective, efficient, deadly, and yet they seem like a fun group of guys to hang out with.
Yeah. As we'll see in the next chapter, they look like
Oh
they're just kind
yes,
of lounging around having a pretty good time. Um,
yeah,
we learn another detail about Kareed in this chapter that's it's a tiny thing, but something I really like. We find out something else Kareed is good at. He's not only this great martial artist, strategist, he's basically good at everything we've seen him try to do so far. He's also a coffee connoisseur. As soon as he
yes,
tastes this coffee, he knows where it's from. I like how he's just able to sit there and mindfully savor it.
yeah,
And we know that he likes it, so he's endured a lot of other kinds of privation, but he's surprised himself by how much he missed coffee after his ran out, which I think a lot of people could probably relate to, having a hard
uh,
time doing without that. Um,
amen. Preach it, sister.
but I just especially like that detail of him savoring it, and it seems kind of counterintuitive for his personality. Like it seems like something a little too artsy to be like a food connoisseur of some kind for this like really macho martial artsy bodyguard guy, because he's this like, I mean, Kareed is this like paragon of hypermasculinity and just all around like the best macho awesomeness, right? To me, anyways,
Right.
that's how I think about him. And we don't typically see these like stoic, masculine action hero type people enjoying or savoring things, right? The types of feelings we usually see them have or exhibit is anger, like righteous anger. And so they're, if anything, they're seeking revenge or something like that. Otherwise, they're kind of like
Right.
stoic and don't show that they like feel things. So for him savoring this coffee, I mean, there's a few different ways you could read it. It could just be a tiny detail on the surface. Maybe Kareed is just really good at everything, so he just instantly knows where this coffee is from. Like Robert Jordan just wrote him kind of a
Yes.
little too superpowered. We could also see he's just like a coffee addict, so he's just really struggling and, just really savors whatever drop of it he can get on this side of the ocean. But to dig a little bit deeper, I think it implies something about his training. And this may be sort of because of reading the Realm of the Elderlings, where Fitz has so much assassin training that involves so much more than like weapon use or something, right? I've got this on the brain, but a good bodyguard needs to be much more aware of their senses, all of their senses, than the average person.
Yes. Yes.
So not only does he need to be really in tune with his body in like a kinesthetic sense so that he's always ready for unexpected fights, like he's aware of his footing and stuff like that, and pays attention to what he sees and hears instead of what he expects to see and hear, just like you said earlier. But I think he might even be able to detect stuff like poison. Like I imagine there are Docovale who are sort of food tasters, but I just feel like as a bodyguard, he's got to know something about that.
Right.
So yeah, even though this is such a little detail, I think the fact that it's included here, and if we take it together with information like the fact that he really seems to love and care about Tuon, he's got this regard for his duty above his personal honor, it kind of speaks to how you need to feel things to be at your peak performance, right? You don't need to be the stoic action hero. You kind of have to open yourself up to things, and to be trained to be this good at stuff is going to be boring looking stuff. It's not going to be just like swinging around weapons. It's going to be basically meditating and like noting very carefully what you sense. And I just feel like his sommelier skills maybe were part of that. I don't know.
Right. No, I think that makes sense. And what you said about the hypermasculinity, the stoicness of these warriors, that is very common in fictional literature.
Yeah, exactly.
Literature.
That's what I mean. I like he's portrayed in a realistic way instead of like the fictional action hero way.
That's where I was going to go with this. People who are great tacticians, generals, great thinkers, and we see through his eyes, he is a deep thinker.
Mm-hmm.
He is, he could take a very philosophical point of view of what he's going through at the time, and and be able to put his emotions aside and follow his intellect. People like that tend to have different hobbies or things where they can put their mind at ease and de-stress, de-escalate with their hobbies, being able to relax mentally so that they can come back into the game more focused.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's one of the things of his, that he really is a coffee connoisseur.
Yeah.
Plus, it also, I guess, pays tribute to his position within the Empire, that he would be able to afford the very good coffees, the very best, to know what they taste like. Now, that's not what he carried with him across the Aryth Ocean. It's not what he'd recently run out of. But yeah, he's had it enough to know good coffee from bad coffee. So that speaks a lot, both for the financial position he's been in and has enjoyed much of his life, and his training and his ability to decompress sometimes and just be a person and enjoy those things. And that, like you said, it lends so much realism, so much depth to this character that we don't really stop and think about on a read through. We hit it and say, okay, yeah, he knows this coffee from that coffee. But when you really stop and think about it, it makes him so much more human and so much more real. And I enjoy that about so many of the characters in this series. Is just so well done, because there are very few one-dimensional characters. Most every one of them are multifaceted in so many different ways, and Karede is certainly no exception to that.
Doing these character studies now it makes me want to read Robert Jordan's notes, because I know he had these massive files on each character. I want to be like, how much did we get right about Karede's background? Because I know he's probably got like a whole page on just how he was trained or something.
Oh yes, yeah. Oh, that would be awesome to have access to that. I mean, the Black reference book has a lot of information like that.
Yeah,
but it's not even the tip of the iceberg of what he had to have. But I wonder if Karede, as he's talking to this other general, they're surmising about the forces that are harrying them, and Karede kind of has it in his mind, this is probably one of the great generals. Of course, he thinks it's Tom Maryland, because he's following Seeker Moore's plot in this, and his conspiracy theory of what's going on. But I wonder if you could have pulled him aside and said, now listen, in a few months' time, at the last battle, on the edge of time itself unraveling, you're going to fight side by side with this great general. And it's not Tom Maryland, but you're going to fight side by side with him. I just wonder how he would have taken that,
Probably like a kick to the chest, like he did any other piece of surprising information.
The wonderful thing about Karede is he doesn't change much. I guess He would probably say, well, if that's what the Empire and the Empress wants, I will fight side by side with this general.
Yeah.
He'd be good with that.
Yeah, I guess so. He doesn't philosophize or think too deeply about things like that. It is it seems like he knows what his duty is, and he immediately goes for that. He doesn't have a lot
Yes.
of doubt or anything. So I'm going to get
Right.
more into that later, though. I'm going to let you get into your fun summary of chapter 36.
Okay. Chapter 36 is entitled Under an Oak. Karede and his men had made good time and caught up with Matt's band before they entered the Malvide Narrows. The band was off the road, but Ajumbura had found them easily. Karede had left most of his men behind and entered the camp with just himself, Ajumbura, 2 more guardsmen, 2 Ogier gardeners, and a Sultan with her damane. It was very likely a suicide mission, but worth the risk to him if he could convince Tom Maryland to release the High Lady without a fight. He knew that they had been spotted by scouts as soon as he heard the bird calls, and even himself spotted one of the men camouflaged up in a tree. Then they entered the camp, and Furyk was surprised to see men at once so relaxed, some were even sleeping, and disorganized, yet moving like men of war who were good at what they did. They seemed to be ready all the time, though they looked undisciplined. There were no more than 7,000 or 8,000 men there. Where were all the rest? Ajumbura had slipped off unnoticed to bring word of the camp and its forces when Karede and the rest of his group were led by Captain Talmanes up to the command tent. The camp leaders were sitting outside the tent under an oak tree. There was Mistress Anon, the former innkeeper, and Aegeon and Tamarath, a Seanchan ship's captain, as well as many others gathered around. And Karede was not certain which one was Marilyn until he was introduced. But the introduction was cut short as 3 women with ageless faces stormed up and had an altercation over the damane that accompanied him. Their furor was stopped quickly when a young man rode up, one Karede remembered as having been Tylan's pet. The High Lady Tuon was with him, followed by Selucia. Tylan's pet immediately bullied all of the channelers into removing the shields that they had woven against one another and into releasing the power. He gave orders as if he expected to be obeyed and was not afraid at all of their power. In fact, he seemed to be able to tell when they were holding the power. Could he be one of those mysterious Ashaman? One who had been controlled by Tylan, though? It made no sense. Then Karede made his sales pitch to General Maryland. They had fought well, but now Karede had 10,000 men with him and could hold their force in place for a couple of days until General Chizen arrived with his own army. But, you see, they could avoid all the bloodshed if they would just let the High Lady go with him, and Karede would allow them to all slip away quietly. Everyone would get what they wanted. General Maryland smiled and stroked his mustache and dramatically informed Furyk Karede that he was not the one in charge of this army. That honor belonged to one Lord Matram Cawthon, and he bowed with a flourish to Tylan's former pet. Then Matt quickly laid out his own facts. Karede only had 100 men or so, with some Ogier gardeners, and they might be the best out there, but they were outnumbered too badly to hold Matt's forces. General Chizen and his troops were actually 5 days away at least and headed the other direction. Quote, "The real question is this, though. Can you get Tuon to the Terrason Palace safely?" End quote. Karede was incredulous that his plan seemed to be working, even though Lord Cawthon had known he was lying. Why would they let the High Lady go so easily after all of the trouble the White Tower had gone through to kidnap her in the first place? Matt informed him that the entire ever-victorious army was trying to kill Tuon, and she could go with Karede only if she trusted him. The High Lady questioned Karede and asked if he still had the doll that she had given him. He hadn't known until then that she had even recognized him, but she had recognized him and had even followed news of him and his family in the years since. She said this, quote, "I trust the Death Watch guards with my life," the High Lady replied calmly, "and him more than any other." End quote. Karede bowed deeply to the High Lady. Then, and I'll close out my summary with a direct quote from the last couple of paragraphs. Quote, Matrim Cawthon is my husband, the High Lady Tuon said in a loud, clear voice. Everyone froze where they stood. Matrim Cawthon is my husband. Karede felt as if Hartha had kicked him again. No, not Hartha. Aldazar. What madness was this? Cawthon looked like a man watching an arrow fly toward his face, knowing he had no chance to dodge. Bloody Matrim Cawthon is my husband. That is the wording you used, is it not? This had to be a fever dream. End quote.
All right. Thank you for... I don't remember which of us summarized that the last time. I was about to say your second summary of this chapter, but it's the second time we've covered it, because first we covered it from Matt's perspective. We will do it a third time also, maybe briefly. I'm not really sure exactly how we'll do it just yet, but when we do our Tuon episodes coming up next. So in just a couple episodes, we'll get right back to it. Yeah, it's really, there's a lot of hilarious irony here with just dramatic irony of everybody else except Karede understanding what's going on. And Karede's not used to being in that kind of position. He is used to observing and kind of collecting intelligence as he goes along. And he did that, but pretty much all of it failed him. None of it led him to Matt as being the leader here. He had some intel on Matt as having been Tylan's toy, but he dismissed him for that reason. And also the fact that he looked so young. You know, that's how I described him when he first saw him. Some kid rode up on a horse. I'm pretty sure it's the one that used to be pranced around in ribbons in the palace. And for some reason, Aes Sedai listened to him, and even Suldam. So he's just absolutely out of sorts. Still, though, despite the fact that he has so much surprising stuff going on, there's a lot of stuff he takes in stride to a surprising degree. Like, sure, plenty of it, he's like, this is absolutely bonkers, I must be having a fever dream. But some of the stuff, like understanding that he is going to have to undermine other forces of the Empire, he doesn't think twice about at all. He's going to have to cut off Chisen's forces here, or at least, get Tuon out of here before that happens. And he just snaps that kind of information into place with he doesn't think anything about the consequences, no doubts about it. He doesn't worry about how he's going to, whether Tuon would pardon him later or whether he's going to have a court-martial or whatever. He's so single-minded, like, get High Lady out of here to safety, and that's it. And he kind of shuts out irrelevant information, but somehow these like walls he has built up around stuff he's supposed to question and stuff that he's not supposed to question, it doesn't leave him in an ignorant, like, zealot type of single-mindedness like we see some white cloaks. It seems like he could have been a pretty simple guy like that who's just doing what he sees as his duty, but I'm just still impressed by how flexible he is to use a lot of new details to help him find Tuon, that he's got this good head for strategy, but he can still just completely avoid some topics altogether. So, I don't know, it just seems like he has extremely good mental control as well as he does physical. So not only can he control himself from responding to insults, he's got all this careful control of all of his senses and what his body is doing at any given time. And he's got very good control of kind of where information goes in his mind. And I think that's fascinating about him.
Yeah. So he's a very intelligent man, and I like that about him. The leap in logic from hearing that your Chisen was coming back to, face all these forces that, had the Seanchan in disarray, and taking that bit of fact and just suddenly realizing, okay, they're headed for the Narrows. Now that Chisen is leaving that area, that's where they're going. That was a big chance. It took a very big chance.
Yeah.
Because Matt and company could have been heading any other direction in the world. But I think he did what any good security professional, police officer, soldier, anybody who's good at those crafts like that, they learn to think like the bad guy or the enemy. Because you have to. You have to take into account, okay, if knowing what the enemy knows, what would their plans be? If I was in this situation, what would I do? And if you learn to think like the enemy, then you can outthink the enemy, or you can figure out where they're headed, where they're going. It doesn't always work flawlessly, but you have to use that to a degree. So yeah, he shows himself to be very adept at that as well. Just in understanding, okay, that's where they're headed. They're headed for the Malvide Narrows. They're trying to get out of here, and of course, in his mind, they're trying to kidnap the High Lady Tuon, and take her to the White Tower. Even though that's not what's happening, he still used that information and came to the correct conclusion. So that's awesome.
I hear you that he's incredibly intelligent and very quick thinking compared to the enemy. And the fact that you were saying he has to think like the enemy in order to outwit them just made me think even more about what I was saying earlier about his training, that he must have had basically assassin training to know how to outsmart assassins. And so he has to think kind of like an enemy general too, which is a little different. But I like how you drew that parallel last week where you said he's kind of thinking of the entire, he could think of an entire forces in a set of forces in an army as that royal person that he has to protect or whatever. And here he's still thinking about, how do I get this single royal person out of this situation safely? And so, yeah, he does have to think like the criminals, I guess, in order to make that work. He does an extremely good job at it.
Right. And to be so focused on rescuing Tuon that he's willing to kill any of the Altarans or anybody else that gets in his way.
Mm-hmm.
He's willing to kill Seanchan, as you said, to go up against some of his own people and put his second in command in that position to save the High Lady Tuon. He's willing to risk it all.
Yeah.
But, they're always measured risks. Even here, when he walks into this camp, knowing it's probably a suicide run, he takes a few people with him. I would assume they're volunteers who all know we probably won't come back for this. We're walking into the enemy's camp. At best, they will probably hold us hostage. Yeah, that's what he's expecting, or to die fighting his way out of the camp. Just something, anything. But he does this quick mental count. Hey, there's far fewer men here than I expected, and I think he's already adjusted his plans from the time he left the road heading to the camp, and by the time he was introduced to quote unquote General Maryland, which I find hilarious too.
Yeah.
But and as we said, as a good bodyguard would do, he has read the body language of all these people, and he's trying to fit the pieces into place. Here's Mistress Anon, and the innkeeper, and he's like, how deep does this conspiracy go?
Mm-hmm.
How many people are involved here? And he sees the ship's captain, Agianan, and so here's some more people who are in on it. She's with this big burly Ileana, ugly fella. And then he sees Noel and wonders briefly if Noel could be Marilyn because he's old and he looks dangerous. He made a move as if he wanted to grab a knife from under his coat.
I like that he notices that about Noel that nobody else really seems to.
Right.
He sees it through him in a way there.
Yeah, right. Noel is the harmless old man to everybody except the people who underestimate him. And here, Furyk Karede did not underestimate him. So he reads everyone just kind of instantly, but yet he plays all of his cards right up front. Spills everything out to Tom Maryland, and then Tom, of course, gets to do his best bard's performance here. That I'm just a gleeman, and while that may be a step above court bard, I'm not. I'm not in charge of this band. It gives the bow and the flourish, just as he had to do it, and Furyk Karede even noted how the timbre of his voice changed, of Marilyn's voice changed, as Tom started speaking, because at that moment Tom was performing in front of a crowd. He was doing what he does best. And if it was in sarcasm, fine, he's still performing in front of a crowd, and you could just sense that Tom was loving every second of that, because not only was every eye drawn on him and everybody like, what in the world's going on, but at the same time he knows he's about to refer to Matt as Lord Matrim Coffin, and he was enjoying every second of that. So he was enjoying it, and Matt was not, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
I like that, and even though we've covered this is the second time we've covered this section. The thoughts of covering it a third time soon do not bother me at all.
Right? Same.
Because I so love this chapter. Even reading it today in preparation for this and taking notes, I would just break down laughing. The rest of the family looks at me like, what's wrong with this Ileana scholar? Well, I, I'm enjoying this work very, very much.
I like that we learned about a little more about Kareed here, just how attached he feels to Tuon. We've been learning about that for sure, but we
Hmm.
see it even more where he almost cries when she shows that she has kept up with him over the years and knows what happened to his
Yes.
family and everything. His throat tightens. That's the biggest, show of emotion we're ever going to get from Kareed. um,
Right, right.
and I mean, maybe I think Matt noticed surprise on his face or something like that, so that must have been pretty huge too. But for him to almost cry like that, that's as close as he's gonna get. It's just interesting to see him feel, to
Yes.
be in his mind while he's really like emoting as much as he's going to emote. um
Hmm.
I think it goes to show for Tuon and Kareed here just how much they view each other really like a family connection, because I mean, Kareed had his own family, he has grown sons still and everything, and but his duty to the empire and the empress has always had to be first. I'm sure even before his family, we see the way he's so devoted to Tuon, so he must have been even while his kids were growing up and everything.
Right, right.
And Tuon has no real attachment to her parents. She was surrounded by siblings trying to kill her and everything from the moment of her birth, and the people who were always there with her and for her became the closest thing she had to family, the people that she would feel the most tender about, people like Selucia and Kareed here. And I don't think he realized that their feelings for each other were mutual, that they really both care for each other.
Right.
And so seeing him as vulnerable as he's going to get in a moment like this was really cool, again, for this like action hero type character who's just like
Right.
really good at everything. This just hardened bodyguard type person. It was really cool to see that, because I don't understand how you could be that devoted to somebody and not have this kind of attachment,
Right.
so
Right.
it feels very realistic to me.
Yes. Even though they were dissuaded, they were not supposed to form personal attachments.
Yeah.
How could you not? When you're willing to die for somebody, that is a sign of love,
Right.
even if it's, maybe not love for the individual, but for what they represent. That's still that takes love. That takes dedication.
Mm-hmm.
Bodyguards and people who do that today, they they're doing it out of love for the person they're protecting or for the end, not the industry, the institution for which they represent, or
Mm-hmm.
for their country itself, or whatever the case may be. A bodyguard that's protecting you just for money can also turn traitorous just for money.
Yeah.
Someone who believes they're answering to a higher calling in some way is going to be faithful, and that's the ones you can trust. And he's very trustworthy, and we know this when we get to see things through his eyes. That yeah, he's not just spouting the company line. He believes it, and he really would die for her. He really has taken wounds protecting her, and yeah, he would do it and count it an honor, not a loss, to die protecting her. So, yeah, he's the real deal, and I like that about Kareed. Um, and I love his consistency here.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first things when all the chaos is going on of the Aes Sedai coming up, attacking about the Damane that's with him, who used to be an Aes Sedai, and Matt comes riding up on his horse, and here's Tuon and Selucia right behind him, and Matt turns and says something to Tuon, but calls her by name, and Kareed gets upset over it. Now he
Oh
doesn't
yeah.
show it because again he's got the greater mission here, but if the greater mission were not there, he probably would have tried to kill Matt right then, right
Yep.
there. I
Yep.
mean, yeah, that upset him. And then when I talked earlier about he and Matt fighting together in the last battle, he would only fight alongside Matt if Matt would agree to start calling her by her true name and title.
Yeah.
And I love that consistency. They
Mm-hmm.
did. They never dropped a beat. He's never changed a bit in his devotion. The things that upset him today will upset him tomorrow, and for the same reasons.
Yes.
And yeah,
If
so
because of his consistency and duty and everything, if
yes,
had been an empire full of just like fully staffed with Furyk Kareeds, they would be unstoppable, and those people would
yes,
be 100% willing to continue to uphold their institutions of slavery, of Dakovale and Sojin and Damane. But the fact that everybody else is regular people and not superhuman action hero Furyk Karede, who just does their duty, is actually ultimately a good thing for the world. Now, it's not great for the Empire, staying the cohesive Empire as they know it to be right now, but I'm just glad that they weren't full of Furyk Karedes. Like, I guess you gotta have respect for the fact that he does his duty, but he's doing his duty for a corrupt empire, and so I know we've been talking him up so much that I guess I had to provide that balance. Like, okay, we are still not pro Shan-Chan. I don't want to make that clear.
Right. No.
They still are doing some pretty evil things, and he is a part of that machinery that does that. But yeah, he's an interesting person to be in the head of. He doesn't feel like being in the head of the enemy, I guess, because at this point we have already come to sympathize with Tuon quite a bit too, which is also a confusing thing to feel because of her upholding of the evils that the Empire does too.
Right. But again, we do have those hopes that it will change. And I think that's one of the reasons we can begin to like Tuon and her character and the things she does, because we do get to see through her eyes somewhat. We see her justifications for the things she does, although we may not agree with all of them. We can have that understanding, but we're left with that hope, hanging just out of reach that she will change and that she will force a change over the entire empire. Mm-hmm. The positive changes, the stepping away from those things we see as evil. Not given a definite that it will happen. In fact, we're given some prophecies or prophetic visions to Aviendha that they will hunt down and just completely destroy the Aiel and their entire way of life and everything about them. But at the same time, we're given some hope that they as a society will change and will grow beyond some of their barbaric practices.
Yes, and hope that those visions are already not going to come to pass, because there are already things like, I think Ruark was in them, but he dies in the last battle. So exactly. We're already set on a different path, and I like that. Right.
Yeah, and I think it was, was it Soralea or Amis? One of the older wise ones was telling Aviendha, well, just secretly, you know the names of your two children. Give one of them a different name. You'll prove to yourself that you can change some things from this vision, and it won't come to pass that way. So, I like those things. This is one where there's a lot of emotion at the end of this chapter. Furyk Karede feels like he's been kicked by, not just by a horse, but by his war horse. Yeah. One who could really do damage. With just all the emotion he's feeling here. And in a way, you kind of feel sorry for him. I want to feel a little bit of sympathy for Matt Cawthon, but I can't. When Tuon stands up and starts declaring Matt Cawthon is my husband. And I still love the description that Furyk Karede gives, as Matt was standing there like a man who sees an arrow flying toward his face and knows he can't dodge. This something he cannot stop. It's headed his way. And I'm not saying marriage is a bad thing or it's damaging, but just that description is hilarious to me, because you can picture Matt with that expression. I mean, just this shock and almost horror that, oh my goodness, I can't stop this. It's really happening. But the one I think I feel most sorry for is Ajumbura.
That one I did not expect.
You didn't expect that one, because earlier in the chapter, it's said he's coming with them, and he's intentionally designed to look to where he blends in, where he doesn't stand out in any way. Everybody else, has their armor polished, or has the Adom. There's something to draw attention to them. But he cut his braid off to be able to, just blend in and sneak away and tell the other forces, okay, here's exactly where they're camped. Here's how many of them there are. Yes, the High Lady Tuon is there. All these important bits of information. And so he was the spy set back. But to do that, he had to cut off his braid. And that long red braid among his people, you wear it as a sign of honor. So if you're in a clan feud, somebody killed you, they cut off that braid as a trophy. And he kind of says it in passing, but toward the beginning of this chapter, that is a sign. To cut off the braid is a sign of cowardice.
Mm-hmm.
A sign to declare, I'm a coward. I'm not going to give you a trophy. And he did that as in his devotion for Furyk Karede. He was willing to cut that off to declare himself a coward in front of everybody for no reason. Because because he needn't have bothered. It was, the plan did not go as Furyk thought it would. And it was just a total waste of his honor, just totally destroyed.
What?
And I feel sorry for Ajambura because of that.
I never would have thought about it that way, because he's characterized so little and focused on so little.
Yes.
But maybe it still continued to come in handy, because they have to get all the way back to Abu Dar. So he needs a scout. Ajambura still makes a good scout.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe it does still come, maybe it's not in vain. And
I hope not.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, this is the last time Ajambura is in the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Unless there's another mention that I don't recall, but I don't recall any others. In the last battle, Furyk Karede is there guarding the Empress, but yeah, Ajambura is not around. So we don't know if he left in disgust or if he just was given other duties, if he's back at camp, keeping everything prepared. We just don't know. But it bothered me, not that he did that, because that's a sign of his devotion, but the fact he did it and didn't need to. He could have wadded that braid up, stuck it under his cap, and been just fine. Could have worn the braid. They would have known. He's
hunting rats for everybody in the last battle while everybody's too busy to cook, and they got so many people around making so much noise, all the game is running away, except for rats. They thrive around people. So
yes,
and Ajambura's got that covered. He's feeding everybody.
Thank you. I needed that. Maybe he just kind of pinned the braid to the back of his shirt if he ever went back home, just to have it there. I don't know, but it did make me feel sorry for him. That not just that he did it, but he did it for no reason. He didn't need to. Oh my! So yeah, this is a fun chapter because there's just so many cool things in there.
We over focused on some tidbits like braids and coffee savoring, and that's what I really love about this podcast, is finding these details that I never would have enjoyed otherwise. I have a good time doing this.
Exactly. And I really do hope that all of our listeners out there are enjoying this as well, and I hope you'll come back next time for Interlude episode 8, where we will begin Tuon's point of view in Winter's Heart chapter 14 and Knife of Dreams chapters 26 and 36.
There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the Wheel of Mind, but this is an ending. To catch a beginning next time an episode drops, subscribe to Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, or Spotify. You could also find our episodes on YouTube under the channel name Lajara Dane. That's LaJaradayne. We'd love to hear how we're doing, so leave us some feedback by rating and reviewing on whichever platform you use to listen to us. You could contact us by emailing lajaradane@gmail.com or on Twitter @mind_wheel. To support the show and get access to some perks, subscribe to us on Patreon for just $3 a month by visiting patreon.com/wheelofmind.